Welcome to the fourth part of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead, Tales from the Final Day. It was morning, now the seventh day since the Cataclysm began. Foster was relaxing on the roof of his secured apartment building. Over the days before, he had removed all the zombies from this apartment's 6 upper floors, before breaking the only stairwell up from the ground level, making it impossible for any of the undead creatures below to ever reach him. As Foster listened to the sound of birds chirping in the morning air, he noticed that his solar fridge was not charging as well as he'd hoped. One of the batteries was damaged and seemed to be draining more power than it gained from the solar panels. He could fix the crippled battery if he used an arc welder, but he would also need some serious eye protection to use it without going blind. Foster searched through his stockpile, but he couldn't find anything that would do the trick. He noticed a hardware store in the distance, 7 blocks away, which seemed much too far. Foster had barely traveled outside at all, and risking his life now, when everything seemed to be going so smoothly, just for the chance that welding goggles were still there, was not worth the risk. Instead, he kept hoping that the battery would work. After waiting an hour, he was certain that it was wasting too much of its charge. The battery fault was too severe, and he had no means of fixing it. Foster decided to remove the damaged battery, leaving just 1 car battery in his 2-fridge, 8 solar panel system. Once the faulty battery was removed, the system seemed to be charging smoothly. He'd still need to see whether the single battery would be enough to power both a fridge and freezer through the night when the solar panels would not be active. He decided that the best backup plan would be to turn off the fridge and use the freezer only. That way, the food would freeze while the solar panels were on, and even if the system ran out of power, the food would still remain cold for the few hours before the solar panels would be active again. His system was heavy on solar panels and produced an excessive amount of power during the day. Foster decided that it would be a good idea to establish a whole kitchen up here, with a stove to cook and boil water on. But he soon realized that he couldn't go any further without some kind of welding goggles. Both the RV kitchen unit and the cooking rig recipe required welding. It seemed like he couldn't get around this. He would need to go out once more. Even if he found some sunglasses, he could create his own welding goggles by assembling them together and layering the tinted glass. Foster had spotted a clothing store across the street from his apartment, right beside a cemetery. Going there would be a risk, but nowhere near as risky as going all the way across the several city blocks to the hardware store. But he would only go at night, for now it was day, so he prepared his go bag. For tonight's trip, he would bring 25 firecrackers, a lighter, a matchbook, and his extendable baton. To carry anything of value he would find in the clothing store, he wore a makeshift sling, as well as a duster with pockets, a leather apron, his light jacket, and his pants also had pockets. Foster wanted to prepare some more makeshift armor. He crafted a pot helmet by wrapping some rags around a kitchen pot. Then he made 2 pairs of hand wraps and put them both on. Now, Foster felt truly ready to take on the apocalypse. In total, he would be able to carry up to 28 liters of things. He planned out the night's journey and identified 2 houses that he could use to climb on top of if there were any problems down on the street. He took his last charged battery out of his soldering iron and placed it into his flashlight. The battery had just a minor amount of charge left, but that would be enough for this one night. Foster's mind sparked with a plan. He decided that he would try and set a nearby house on fire while he was out. He reasoned that since the zombies were attracted to sound, they would surely be drawn to the noise and spectacle of a burning, collapsing building. There were many houses nearby where Foster was, and a good number of these were far enough away that the fire wouldn't risk also burning the apartment. Foster picked up bits of wooden splinters from around the apartment's broken hallway doors. He also took 3 wooden planks into his sling. His plan was to cross the road south from his apartment. Then he would light the houses there on fire, and when the blaze seemed to be taking hold, he would escape into the clothing store across the street to the east. It seemed simple enough. He was content with his preparations and passed the day reading a book on unarmed combat. He read until he was dead tired, and then ate some pears, drank some orange juice, and went to sleep. He awoke at 10:52 p.m. to the sound of his alarm. It was time to go. He drank some more juice and began to descend to the ground level. Foster left the safety of the apartment building. The sky was clear tonight, and the streets were moonlit enough for his eyes to see a fair distance. He could see that there weren't too many zombies remaining here. He made his way south down the streets, avoiding the few shambling undead. As he crept through the night, he spotted something massive in the shadows. A grotesque mass of zombies fused together by the process of decay. He kept his distance from this gigantic danger as he circled wide around it. Passing the lawns of the nearby houses, Foster spotted a tough zombie crouched over a corpse. The corpse seemed to be zombified, but it looked like the zombie had slain it anyway. Once the zombie was drawn away, Foster rushed to the body and took a first aid kit. It looked to be a firefighter. He withdrew a first aid kit from the body, as well as a firefighter's PBA mask. This would be exactly what he needed for glare protection to use his welder. The streets were not as dangerous as he had feared. Foster decided to try to explore while it was night. He stepped into the dark clothing store. It was too dark to see inside, and since the entrance was made of glass, Foster didn't want to use his flashlight quite yet. There were too many zombies around, and some were already drawing near, having smelled him from outside. He was already growing exhausted, and Foster retreated, seeing a drain pipe that he could climb at the house where he intended to start a fire. Foster hoisted himself up the pipe and caught his breath when he was safe on the roof. He still had a long night ahead. Once he caught his breath, he descended a separate drain pipe back down to the dangerous streets. He circled clockwise behind the house, searching for a rear entrance. There was one on a patio, which was encased in a mesh screen with a screen door. He stepped onto the patio and opened the unlocked back door. But as he stepped forward, a toddler zombie emerged. Foster stepped back as the creature followed. He rushed off the patio and closed the mesh door to block it off. The thing was so weak, it couldn't break through a mesh screen. It clawed at it, trying unsuccessfully to reach him. Foster continued to circle the building, coming up to the front driveway door. There was a body here, with a voltmeter and smartphone, which Foster took with him. He set down 2 planks and some wood chips and started a fire. The building seemed to be made of adobe brick, but he hoped that by setting the fire beside the front door, it might still catch fire and spread to the home's inside floor. He was not an experienced pyromaniac, and this was probably not the right way to do it. As the wood began to ignite, Foster retreated back south to the home's backyard as he saw a zombie approach the fire. He passed the zombified toddler again, who scratched at the mesh between them. Passing a window, a zombie, likely the thing's parent, saw him from inside and broke the glass, shattering the silence of the night. He turned the home's corner to see several zombies now closing in. Worst of all, he spotted a disgusting creature with oversized eyes. This beast seemed to have spotted him despite the night's darkness. The creature, a sproglodyte, had gigantic claws. Foster rushed north, away and back towards the apartment. A zombie dog also took chase as Foster ran hard. More zombies were also converging from the north, and Foster tried to keep distance as he passed them. He still had nearly a full block to go, but his legs were getting exhausted. The zombie dog was gaining on him. Rather than let it catch him fully exhausted, he turned and extended his Malkop baton. He beat the dog as it tore at his leather apron, unable to pierce his armor. He knocked it down as another zombie drew near, and Foster began walking away again to the north. He noticed a hugely engorged zombie, its mouth fizzing with glowing pink liquid. It hadn't spotted him, and so he turned and began to beat up the pursuing zombie using his baton. But he quickly realized he wouldn't have enough strength to kill it before growing too exhausted. He cut his losses and ran, now heavily exhausted. Another zombie dog was ahead, likely following his scent from before. It was beside a hatchback, which seemed to be in working shape. Foster had no choice but to enter the hatchback, the zombie dog lodging itself in the driver's door as he entered. Foster beat the dog to death and closed the driver's door as it slumped to the ground. With the car doors closed, Foster tried to catch his breath. The monster, composed of several fused zombies, drew near. He tried to turn the car on. It hummed to life, and Foster put the car into reverse. Running over a legless zombie, he went back until he nearly crashed into the cargo truck that he had removed the battery from a night or two prior. Foster changed gear and rushed the car forward again into the zombies that had been trailing him. The hatchback crashed through zombie after zombie as Foster launched the car forwards and in reverse, killing as many as possible. The more zombies that were dead, the fewer that would trouble him tonight. He could see that many were still twitching on the ground and would likely rise again if he did not turn the corpses into pulp by destroying their brains. He kept on, bashing the car into the masses of zombies as the impacts began to cave in the car's hood. When it seemed that enough had been slain, Foster exited the car and went back south to inspect the damage. Still, the huge boomer zombie from before was alive, but he began to pulp the zombies that were far enough away to not draw its attention. Foster tried to squeeze beside it, believing it to be too slow to follow, but the thing puked up a pink fizzing spray that coated Foster and illuminated him in the night and blinded him. He was now an easy target for any zombies left alive. He rushed back to the mangled but still working hatchback. Breathing hard, he launched the car back and forth again, trying to slaughter the zombie that had sprayed him. The fused zombies stepped into the path of his car, and he bashed the car into them at high speed, the impact sending his car veering off. They didn't go down, but were launched off to the side, still moving. After another pass, he crashed square into them, knocking the fused zombies to the ground. He kicked up the speed and splattered a zapper zombie at such speed that it instantly exploded into gore. Foster parked the car, still illuminated by the pink bile, and used a winch to open a nearby garage door. Closing the garage door behind him, he flashed his flashlight, expecting to see a zombie inside. Instead, he could hardly believe what he saw. A superbike, in perfect condition, was right here in the garage, just a tiny distance across the street from his apartment. It had been right under his nose, but he hadn't had reason to explore this place before, due to his fear of the city streets. The superbike could be part of Foster's long-term plan. After this first month, Foster could use the bike to escape the city and find a safer place to live long-term. At last, the glowing ick faded away, and Foster was no longer illuminated. He passed through the house and exited a window back out into the streets. With the zombies downed from being run over by his car, Foster returned to the bodies to put them to a final rest. There was a single zombie, which Foster took down using his baton. He beat the corpses until the bodies stopped twitching, killed any stragglers, and then took anything of value from the bodies. He found a multi-tool, which he then used to take out 2 good-quality car batteries to the light of his flashlight. At last, he returned to the apartment with the gore-coated firefighter's mask, as well as 2 car batteries, a first aid kit, some lighters, and a voltmeter. Hopefully, these items would give him another few days without any need to come back down to these dangerous streets. Foster went up to the rooftop and installed the 2 car batteries into his solar fridge, and then checked the power level. It was night, so the solar panels weren't charging. It looked to only have an hour left, which wouldn't be enough to carry the fridge and freezer through the night. He moved all the fridge items into the freezer and turned off the fridge to conserve power for 1 more hour. The food inside would still likely return to room temperature for about 5 hours overnight, but at least now, with the addition of 2 more car batteries, the system would potentially hold for a full night tomorrow. Foster cleaned the bloody filth off of his firefighter's mask. This mask would allow him to use a welder, protecting his eyes from the brightness of the welder's torch. Looking over his rooftop solar power system, he started to think of projects he'd like to complete next. First would be a kitchen unit, then possibly a welding rig, and finally an electric forge. He'd need a steel frame, a hot plate, and a water faucet for a kitchen unit. Knowing the streets were still empty from the destruction he'd caused earlier, Foster went back out to disassemble a car for a steel frame. He loaded a light disposable battery that had around a third of its power left into his cell phone and descended back down to the street. Taking apart the heavy front ram of a 4x4, he hauled the frame up the stepladder and left it on the 2nd floor. Foster wanted to gather more frames, making the most of the empty streets before the zombies might re-inhabit the place. It was only midnight, and some hours of darkness remained. He went up to the cargo van and began to remove a frame from it, but stopped when he heard the groans of a zombie that had noticed his light from the north. As he stepped down out of the cargo van, another feral hunter leaped upon him. Foster fought back, making the most of his training in Krav Maga. The thing was fast, but weak and, being a zombie, did not try to dodge his blows. Soon, both zombies were dead on the ground, their twitching bodies finally put to rest. He kept removing parts from the cars, including a car alternator and its gas tank. With this, he could supplement his solar fridge with gasoline, providing a kick of power when needed. Further, if he ever wanted to use his superbike, he could bring extra gasoline with him on a long journey, but that would be for after this month was up and his food supplies were consumed. Foster removed a second gas tank from a truck for a combined 13 liters of gas and a total capacity of 120 liters. He realized that he'd also need an engine in order to turn the gasoline into power, and to remove an engine, he'd need something capable of lifting the engine block out of a car. Foster went back to his solar rig and removed the improvised lift he'd used to move the fridge and freezer. He brought it down to the street level and used the lift to remove a perfect condition 4-cylinder combustion engine, which was in a small car south of the apartments. While carrying the incredibly heavy engine back up to the apartment, he ran into some zombies and carefully took them down using his Molotov baton. It was 4:07 a.m. The sun would come up soon, and Foster still wanted to get anything else of value. He wanted some more steel frames to help construct any of the cooking, welding, or forging rigs he needed. Already, it seemed the zombies were trickling back into this street east of the apartment. It would be too much work to keep them away, and he knew that at some point he would have to surrender the streets again to the undead. The day rose as he was disconnecting the car battery, seatbelts, and other frames from the hatchback, which he had used to kill so many zombies earlier this night. He returned to the apartment with his haul of nearly 24 vehicle parts. He drank some apple cider and fruit juice for breakfast, and ate some salad and biscuits. Then, Foster installed the car battery into his solar fridge, making it the fourth car battery the system had installed. The batteries would fully charge in just 6 hours of sunlight, leaving him room to add more batteries in the future. He left his system with just the freezer on. Foster didn't want to cause too much drain on the system, as it had never lasted a full night yet. He took apart 2 ovens for parts, and then loaded a half-charged medium battery into his makeshift arc welder. Foster crafted a hot plate out of the heating elements. Then he constructed a full kitchen unit, complete with storage and a burner, and installed it on the roof. Foster made a quick veggie sandwich out of some cucumber and had that for lunch. He brought all the cooking tools up and put them into the kitchen unit. Then he went down to his bookshelf and thumbed through all of his recipe books, indexing their contents. There were 8 cookbooks. Foster didn't know the first thing about how to cook. Most of them were already above his current comprehension, and so he started with the most basic one. Hours passed, and he read through Eat Your Way to a Fit Physique. He got a handle on recipes including scrambled eggs and other essentials. Foster filled a canning pot with water from the toilet tanks on the top floor. He boiled the water and then cooked some instant noodles. He washed them down with another bottle of apple cider and some more fruit juice. With his full solar kitchen working, Foster felt like he was on top of the world. He had a massive supply of food, as well as vehicle parts to build any electronics he wanted in the weeks ahead. Foster spent the rest of the day reading Liverlicious Recipes Your Kids Will Love before he fell asleep at 7:50 p.m. Foster awoke naturally at 5:50 a.m. without an alarm. He went up to the roof and looked at his batteries, glad to see that they still had 65% remaining. This meant that Foster could now activate the fridge as well and put any liquids in there so that he could drink them without needing to defrost them. He'd also frozen his rotten milk jugs just in case he would be able to turn them into powdered milk. He also had some other rotten things that he'd frozen just in case he could use them later, like rotten pizza and other rotten fridge food. He had plenty extra room in the freezer. Foster made some more instant noodles and returned to reading his cookbooks. Now he was at level 2 cooking. Foster took all his dried and canned foods up to the kitchen as well, and stepped back and looked over his supply and what he could make. There was a combined total of 442 liters of food, tin cans and all. If he stacked all the food together, it would be the same volume as an entire fridge or a portable generator. And from his calculations before, this would be enough to live off of for an entire month. Foster started to think about the weeks ahead. He'd proven that he could clear the ground level using vehicles to get supplies, but it was difficult, and the car he used had gotten so badly damaged that he ended up scrapping it for parts. Clearing more of the town would be difficult, and maybe impossible. His attempt to set a house on fire seemed to have failed. Maybe he could try again, the next time using some of the gasoline he'd brought from the car gas tanks, perhaps making a Molotov cocktail. If he set one building on fire on each block surrounding the apartment, he would clear the streets to gather more gas and could systematically pass deeper into the city, luring the zombies into burning, collapsing buildings as he went further. He could even camp out on rooftops, watching the blazes do their work. He could even make use of the superbike he now knew existed in a garage just across the street east from his apartment. Riding it and weaving through the streets, he could toss Molotovs at flammable buildings before returning to the apartment to await the devastation. But there was really no need to go down to the ground level now, especially as he had finished his solar-powered fridge, freezer, and cooking unit. It seemed entirely possible to just sit here and pass the time reading and training his abilities. But that is enough for this episode. I'm beginning to realize that any guess I have for what happens in the next episode most often turns out to be false. I expected this episode would have time skips, but there have been no time skips yet, as I discovered that Foster still needed more items from the street level. Thanks everyone for commenting and just generally being interested in this story. I am planning to make a second season of Tales from the Final Day using a new set of characters once Foster's story has finished. Based on my experiences from this season, the next one will have even more difficult settings and a larger variety of different characters. A good zombie tale, in my opinion, has plenty of unfortunate deaths. It's possible that Foster will be our only winning survivor for some time. So thank you once again, and I look forward to the next part of Cataclysm: Dark Days Ahead, Tales from the Final Day. Thank you.